Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Pakistan has urged the international community to help stop India's systematic violence against women in occupied Kashmir. The Foreign Office said India is using rape of Kashmiri women as an instrument of state terrorism in the occupied valley. This comes as Kashmiris remember the survivors of the 1991 mass rape incidents. In Colombo, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has called on Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. His two-day visit is aimed at boosting ties between the two countries. This is Khan's maiden visit to Sri Lanka since assuming the office in 2018. The United Nations says civilian casualties in Afghanistan have escalated sharply after peace talks began last year. In an annual report, the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan said record-high casualties were reported in the last 3 months of 2020. Meanwhile, the Taliban have rejected the report that blamed the group for most of the deadly incidents. It comes as negotiators from the Afghan government and Taliban met in Doha for the first time after weeks of hiatus. The group of 7 rich countries say the use of violence against people protesting against the coup in Myanmar is unacceptable. In a joint statement, the G7 foreign ministers said the perpetrators must be held accountable. Earlier, the United States imposed sanctions on 2 Myanmar military generals for their role in the coup. The number of COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. has crossed 500,000, while its caseload tops 28.1 million. President Joe Biden observed a moment of silence to commemorate the deaths. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered over 1,000 new cases and 41 deaths overnight as its toll exceeds 12,600. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.4 million lives and infected over 111 million people so far. And in the Pakistan Super League, Peshawar Zalmi will face Multan Sultans today at National Stadium in Karachi. Both teams are equally balanced and are aiming to register their maiden win in the contest. Earlier, Fakhr Zaman and Mohammad Hafiz led Lahore Qalandars to a thumping 9-wicket win over Quetta Gladiators. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. Pakistan has urged the international community to help stop India's systematic violence against women in occupied Kashmir. The Foreign Office said India is using rape of Kashmiri women as an instrument of state terrorism in the occupied valley. The statement comes as Kashmiris remember the survivors of the 1991 mass rape incidents. Indian troops had gang-raped nearly 100 Kashmiri women in the twin villages of Kunan and Pushpura. Islamabad said the day continues to remain a scar on the collective memory of the international community. It said such heinous crimes have intensified since August 2019, when India illegally revoked Kashmir's special status and imposed a curfew. Indian forces have gang-raped or molested more than 11,000 women in Kashmir during the past 3 decades. Moving on, a U.S.-based NGO committee to protect journalists has asked New Delhi to drop investigations into the work of 3 Kashmiri journalists. This comes after the Indian administration in occupied Kashmir opened criminal investigations into journalists for alleged incitement. In a statement, it said journalist Yashraj Sharma Mir Junaid and Sajad Gul should be allowed to do their jobs without harassment. It said Indian authorities must stop targeting journalists because of their reporting. A police case has been registered against Sajad Gul for reporting the demolition drive in Bandipora district. Earlier, a court rejected Shah and Sharma's petition for preemptive bail. Now, to talk more about this, Sajad Gul has joined us, and he's an Indian journalist. Let's ask him about the illegal demolition of houses in occupied Kashmir. Sajad, is the demolition drive part of Indian attempts to change the demography of the region?
I have talked with these revenue officers, particularly with the Tahsildar. He said me that I have orders from head authorities and I have to vacate their lands. And when I asked him a question about why the people go, you are making them homeless because they don't have any other alternative land. He's saying me that I don't care about their rehabilitation.
Sajad, what sort of intimidation are you facing for covering the story?
Simply, I filed a very small story which angered the Tahsildar. The story was actually about a demolition drive he was carrying here in our in North Kashmir's Hajan Sonavari belt. The story was on his demolition drive. Actually, the angle of my story was that he was threatened. According to the local, they were alleging that he's threatening, abusing, and asking us to vacate the land. We don't have any other land where we can reside. But that's the way. That's why. People called me, as I'm a lone reporter here home, they called and said that please get it reported. When I filed the story, he started harassing me. He called me. He even called me through a local DSP here. He was asking me to come at the police station, but I told them that I can't come there because I was busy on that day somewhere on another story. It happened on the 9th of February.
Sajad, last year saw a surge in harassment of journalists and sedition cases were filed against many of them. What do you say on this?
Simply, I filed a very small story which angered the Tahsildar. The story was actually about a demolition drive he was carrying here in our in North Kashmir's Hajan Sonavari belt. The story was on his demolition drive. Actually, the angle of my story was that he was threatened. According to the local, they were alleging that he's threatening, abusing, and asking us to vacate the land. We don't have any other land where we can reside. But that's the way. That's why people called me. As I'm a lone reporter here home, they called and said that please get it reported. When I filed the story, he started harassing me. He called me. He even called me through a local DSP here. He was asking me to come at the police station, but I told them that I can't come there because I was busy on that day somewhere on another story. It happened on the 9th of February.
Moving on, in Colombo, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has called on the Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. His two-day visit is aimed at boosting bilateral ties between the two countries. This is Khan's maiden visit to Sri Lanka since assuming the office in 2018. During his visit, he will also hold talks with the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The talks will cover key regional and international issues as well as matters concerning trade and defense. Khan will also participate in a joint trade and investment conference. A number of memoranda and understanding will be signed during the visit to enhance bilateral cooperation. In India, the protesting farmers have announced to intensify their agitation against the government's contentious farm laws. The growers have also begun a series of events to mark similar protests against the anti-farmer laws by the British government in 1907. Congress leader Priyanka Gandhi will also be attending a farmers' meeting in Uttar Pradesh today. The unions say they will make their future line of action public on February 28th. Meanwhile, a Delhi court will pronounce the verdict on Disha Ravi's bail plea today. She has been arrested for sharing a toolkit on social media related to the ongoing farmers' protest. And the United Nations says civilian casualties in Afghanistan have escalated sharply after peace talks began last year. In an annual report, the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan said record high casualties were reported in the last 3 months of 2020. It said for a 7th consecutive year, UNAMA documented more than 3,000 civilians killed in a single year in Afghanistan. The mission reported 30% of casualties were children, while 13% were women. The Taliban have rejected the report that blamed the group for most of the deadly incidents. In a statement, the group said its concerns, information, and details have not been taken up in the report. It comes as negotiators from the Afghan government and Taliban met in Doha for the first time after weeks of hiatus. Now, the group of 7 rich countries says the use of violence against people protesting against a coup in Myanmar is unacceptable. In a joint statement, the G7 foreign ministers said the perpetrators must be held to account. The United States has also imposed sanctions on the Myanmar military's 2 generals for their role in the coup. In a statement, U.S. Treasury Department warned of further action if the military does not urgently restore democracy in Myanmar. Earlier, the European Union also approved sanctions on Myanmar's military. Meanwhile, Myanmar's army has threatened to withdraw licenses of the media outlets for using the word coup. Pro-democracy protests continue in Myanmar to seek reversal of the coup and the release of Aung San Suu Kyi. Moving on, the U.S. says Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's comment on uranium enrichment sounds like a threat. In a statement, the State Department spokesperson reiterated U.S.'s willingness to engage in talks with Tehran about returning to the 2015 nuclear deal. However, spokesman Ned Price said Tehran has not responded formally to the earlier talks offer. Earlier, Khamenei said Iran might enrich uranium up to 60% purity if needed. Speaking to the Assembly of Experts, Khamenei said Iran will never yield to U.S. pressure over its nuclear program. This came as Iran ended the implementation of additional protocols to carry out snap inspections at nuclear sites not declared to the IAEA. Moving on, the U.S. says it holds Iran responsible for a rocket attack that targeted the U.S. Embassy in Iraq's capital, Baghdad. A State Department spokesperson said Washington will not lash out in response. Iraq's defense ministry said 3 rockets were fired at Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone. It said the attack caused minor property damage, including damage to 4 civilian vehicles. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack so far. Earlier, a rocket attack killed a civilian contractor working with the U.S.-led coalition outside Erbil International Airport. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has stressed the importance of a 2-state solution for Israeli-Palestinian peace. The State Department said Blinken held a telephonic conversation with his Israeli counterpart. In a statement, the department said Blinken said the 2-state solution is best for Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state. It said Blinken stressed the importance of Israel's peaceful coexistence alongside a viable and democratic Palestinian state. It added the secretary addressed U.S.'s approach towards a more peaceful future for Israelis, Palestinians, and the greater Middle East. And Turkey says 2 Syrian soldiers have been killed in a PKK rocket attack in Syria's Tel Abyad district of Raqqa province. The governor's office in Turkish Sunni Liurfa province near Syria border said 7 soldiers were injured in the attack. It said terrorists attacked the army's checkpoint in the town of Ain Issa with a heat-seeking rocket. It added the local authorities have launched an investigation into the attack in coordination with the Sunni Liurfa governorate. Moscow says the European Union's planned sanctions against Russia are unlawful and a cause for disappointment. Earlier, EU foreign ministers agreed to impose sanctions on 4 Russian officials involved in jailing Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. In a statement, the Russian Foreign Ministry said Brussels had missed an opportunity to change its course with regards to Moscow. It added the EU again instinctively has pushed the inoperative sanctions button. The ministry said, defying logic, first a political decision is made and then it is planned to arbitrarily find candidates for it. The ministry said it is typical that the EU global human rights sanctions regime will be used against Russians. Moving on, in Georgia, police have detained the top opposition leader Nika Melia and used tear gas in a violent raid on his party headquarters. Opposition activists clashed with police on the street, while scores of them were arrested. Melia had been accused of inciting violence at street protests in June 2019, a charge he has dismissed as politically motivated. A court in the capital, Tbilisi, ordered last week that Melia be taken into custody for allegedly failing to post bail. But the Interior Ministry postponed the decision following the resignation of Prime Minister Georgi Gakaria on the matter. Meanwhile, Georgia's parliament has elected a new Prime Minister, Irakli Garibashvili, and the cabinet he put forward. The number of COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. has crossed 500,000, while the caseload tops 28 million. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.4 million lives and infected over 111 million people so far. More in this report.
Bells tolled at the National Cathedral in Washington to honor the 500,000 lives lost to COVID-19. President Joe Biden observed a moment of silence to commemorate the deaths. Biden ordered the U.S. flag to be flown at half-mast on public buildings and grounds until sunset on Friday. The president also urged Americans to set aside partisan differences and fight the pandemic together.
I also ask us to act, to remain vigilant, to stay socially distanced, to mask up, get vaccinated when it's your turn. We must end the politics and misinformation that's divided families, communities, and the country. And it's cost too many lives already.
The situation in Europe is not much different as COVID-19 hospitalizations in France continue to surge. However, the British government data has shown a 70% decline in infections after the first Pfizer vaccine shot. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has unveiled a plan to gradually ease curbs. He warned that it can be sustainable only if the UK's vaccine rollout continues seamlessly. But Johnson's chief scientific advisor believes it is too early to be talking about absolute normalcy.
It's possible that coming into next winter, in particular, certain things may be necessary. And Tony Fauci yesterday said in the US that he thought that things like masks may be needed next winter. And I think we're in the same position, that it may be necessary next winter to have things like mask wearing in certain situations.
Australia is set to ramp up its immunization drive with more shots rolled out from next week. Meanwhile, a study has found that people's sense of smell and taste may not return for up to 5 months after contracting coronavirus.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 41 deaths and 1,050 coronavirus infections over the past 24 hours. This has pushed the country's death toll to 12,658. The health ministry said so far over 573,000 people across the country contracted the virus, out of which more than 536,000 have recovered. The ministry said there are more than 24,000 active cases in Pakistan. It said out of over 2,000 patients admitted in hospitals, 1,616 are in a critical condition. More stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. Chief of Naval Staff Admiral Mohammad Amjad Khan Niazi has stressed the need to maintain a high level of combat readiness. He was speaking at the Pakistan Navy Operational Command Seminar held at Behriya Auditorium in Karachi. Admiral Niazi called on naval forces to develop strategies to cope with evolving threats in the maritime domain. He also highlighted various initiatives undertaken by the Pakistan Navy to maintain a potent force. The naval chief commended panel members for presenting well-researched papers and the organizers for professionally conducting the seminar. Over 11,000 Ebola vaccines supplied by the World Health Organization have arrived in Conakry, the capital of Guinea. A new outbreak was declared in the West African country on the 14th of February. In a tweet, the WHO said timely vaccination will be crucial in curbing the Ebola outbreak. WHO's Africa Director, Matshidiso Moeti, said a vaccination team has also been deployed to Niger. The country has recorded 8 cases, 5 deaths, and 380 contacts, of which 98% are being monitored. Moving on, the U.S. Supreme Court has ordered former President Donald Trump to hand over his tax returns to New York City prosecutors. This ends Trump's 18-month quest to conceal the details of his finances. The judges rejected Trump's request to block an earlier ruling by a lower court that said the records were pertinent to a criminal probe. Responding to the decision in a statement, Trump called the inquiry a politically motivated attack by New York Democrats and a continuation of the greatest political witch hunt in U.S. history. He said the Supreme Court should never let this fishing expedition happen. U.S. authorities have arrested the wife of the Mexican drug cartel's former chief, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The Justice Department says Emma Coronel Aispuro was held over her alleged involvement in international drug trafficking. In a statement, the department said Coronel was arrested at Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia. The statement read she is scheduled to virtually appear in federal court later today. Authorities say the 31-year-old was charged with conspiring to distribute drugs for unlawful importation into the U.S. Additionally, she is alleged to have conspired with others to assist Guzman in his July 11, 2015 escape from a prison in Mexico. Guzman was convicted in February 2019 of trafficking tons of drugs and engaging in multiple murder conspiracies. In Texas, nearly 8 million people are still facing water shortages after the record-breaking freeze knocked out power stations last week. Officials say more than 1,200 public water systems reported service disruptions. They say 147 water systems and 4 wastewater treatment facilities are still non-operational. Authorities have advised people to boil water before drinking. Earlier, Texas Governor Greg Abbott joined state and federal authorities in distributing 3.5 million bottles of water. Extreme cold weather has claimed dozens of lives and prompted a major disaster declaration for Texas. Moving on, Brazil's northwestern state of Acre has declared a state of emergency as torrential rains lashed the region. The rains have brought intense flooding and affected more than 120,000 people. Television footage from Acre showed rain-swollen rivers, flooded streets, and residents going around in boats in the floodwaters. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has also visited the region on the border with Peru. More than 6,000 residents have been displaced by the flooding in Acre, which is home to about 895,000 people. The state is also grappling with outbreaks of dengue and COVID-19. And Facebook says it will restore Australian news pages after negotiating changes to a proposed law that will force the tech giant to pay for media content. Canberra has agreed to amend the mechanism for final offer arbitration, among 3 others. Talking to reporters in Canberra, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg said Facebook has refriended Australia. He added Facebook will enter into negotiations with news outlets to strike agreements.
Well, Facebook has refriended Australia, and Australian news will be restored to the Facebook platform. And Facebook has committed to entering into good faith negotiations with Australian news media businesses in seeking to reach agreements to pay for content.
And now for the latest in business. European stocks are trading low as investors focus on coronavirus developments and economic recovery prospects. London's FTSE, Italy's FTSE MIB, and the CAC 40 in Paris have all lost fractionally. Meanwhile, Europe's Stoxx 600 and Frankfurt's DAX also slipped around 0.5%. Earlier, Asian bourses traded mixed with Chinese and South Korean stocks down. And it's time now to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.